anti-drug legislation of 1988. And guess what young staffer working for Senator Moynihan helped write those laws? So this is a full circle for me. I was very involved in the anti-drug legislation and worked with Senator Moynihan and made sure a large part of the funding came to our state, so I'm always proud of that. We are absolutely delighted to be joined here by the newly official, the first Senate confirmed Director of ATF in about 7 years. Quite an accomplishment for our friend Stephen Dettelbeck, and I'll be introducing him momentarily, but also always having a partner. You know, how we deal with crime, getting guns off the streets, making our community safe. It doesn't happen with strong partnerships, and I'll be introducing Mayor Adams to speak about what we're doing collaboratively very shortly. I also want to give a special shout out to Kevin Bruin, the Superintendent of State Police, who's been at my side for exactly 1 year now in terms of making sure that we pull together all the resources available, leave no stone unturned in our quest to make sure that we get illegal guns off the streets. John DeVito, Special Agent of ATF in New York, I want to thank you for what you do statewide. We participated on a call yesterday, and you've been great helping us with other areas like Rochester. You know, we convened for the second time in 3 weeks, a gathering of everybody from federal, state, and local to talk about how we can reduce crime. And indeed, our numbers are showing a decrease literally in the last 3 weeks since we started rethinking our relationships there. Also, Commissioner Rosanna Rosado, the Commissioner of the Department of Criminal Justice Services, I want to thank her for being here as well. We're here to talk about an unprecedented nation-leading response and work on our interstate gun task force. We put this together, and the reason we're doing this is because 1 year ago today I said that my #1 responsibility was to protect the health, safety of all New Yorkers, and that is what I'm going to continue focusing on. We've seen too many lives destroyed by the ravages of gun violence, inflicting trauma on too many communities from here and across upstate. But given the scale of this crisis, we can only confront it in an effective way by working with partners who share our goals, as I mentioned, law enforcement, state, local, federal government. And that's why last January, in realizing that more could be done, I launched the Interstate Task Force on Illegal Guns, first of its kind. We met in Albany, and we talked about, you know, how we can pull together data sharing in other states. Now, what has happened in the past? States conduct their investigations. The data stops at the state line. It was not shared with neighbors, and this pipeline, some call it the iron pipeline of bringing illegal guns in, was being successful because we didn't share data. So I convened representatives for 9 states, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Vermont, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New Hampshire, as well as New York, Quebec, NYPD, Boston PD, ATF, and FBI. And of course the state police. So since January, when we started this, and no other part of our country is doing this, this collaboration, we are now working across borders, getting guns out off the streets and keeping people safe. Because my philosophy is, I'd rather be in the crime prevention business than the crime solving business, and that's what this is all about. So we connect the dots while they're still out there before something tragic happens. And that's why I'm so pleased to have the full support of the federal government in our efforts. I spoke to the new ATF director, Steve Dettelbeck, back when he first assumed his position, and he brought his knowledge already of what we are doing here and talked about how he wants to use this as a blueprint to show other states how to combat gun violence. So over 7 months now in our response to dealing with the epidemic of illegal guns flowing across our states, we already have become that national model. And our gun seizures are up. I'm really proud of this across all New York law enforcement agencies, up 20% through July of this year. And New York State Police, when I first became governor, and I know a little bit about law enforcement, I said, what else can we be doing? Because the guns are coming across borders like Pennsylvania, where there's gun shows, where weapons are being sold. People trafficking are loading up their trunks, filling them with illegal guns or guns legally purchased in Pennsylvania, bringing them to New York where they are illegal, or high-capacity magazines. And literally, these are showing up on the streets of Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, as well as upstate New York, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. So we have been focused on shifting our priorities. I said just get on the border, start sharing information, work with the locals, start doing something differently because this is not sustainable. We have to stop this. So state police have seized from August 2021 to July 2022, almost 1,500 guns. That's compared to 600 guns in the same time period. 1,500 guns versus 600, that's a 140% increase. That's the highest number of guns seized in our state's history. And to put it in context, that's 5 times more guns seized in this last year than they did back in 2001, and more than we did in 2010. So we're focused, the numbers are important, but also what are we doing on ghost guns? Last October, we banned them in the state of New York. I signed it into law, and the director will talk about what they're doing at the federal level as well. We have seized more ghost guns just up through July than we did all of last year. 76 already seized, and we had a big takedown in the North Country just days ago. So it's not just focusing on the trafficking, bringing the illegal guns in here, and we know that all these guns are crossing state lines because they're not made here, so there's automatically, in my opinion, a strong federal nexus that says you've crossed state lines with these weapons, therefore the work that's being done here and across our state with federal partners is critically important. You take these cases to U.S. attorneys and you have federal laws to back you up, and now we've made a real difference. So we're also focusing on the guns that are already here. Mayor Adams and I stood together last January, literally weeks after he was sworn in as mayor, and pledging to work together. And again, that made headlines itself. Mayor of New York working with the governor of New York. And so we have stood side by side this entire time, committed in our united purpose to make sure that we stop the increase in gun violence. So through NYPD's Gun Violence Strategic Partnership, we've seen tremendous progress. I want to thank the mayor for that, and I want to thank the police commissioner. We're honored to have literally in the trenches with you. And it's part of a larger good news story as well, because gun seizures are up. Gun seizures are up and gun crimes are down. And this is the first notable decrease in gun violence since we really had a spike in 2020. I mean, sociologists will study for years to come exactly what happened during this pandemic that drove the increase in crime all across the nation. And that's an important point to make. All across America, gun cases escalated, shootings occurred, crime was up overall. And our report now from the Criminal Justice Services shows that through July of this year, shootings in the state of New York, shootings overall are down 11%, and shooting victims are down 12% compared to the same period last year. So I tell you those numbers not in the context that this is satisfactory, but I'm sure glad it's down 10%, down 11%, as opposed to up 10% or up 11%. So that trajectory is important to note. The trend is going downward, but we will not rest until we get it down to where we had been, where people really did generally feel safe and were safe. So our task force efforts are just one part of our multifaceted fight to end gun violence. And again, I do applaud all the other states and their governors who have sent their people to our meetings. There's a meeting going on at 10 o'clock this morning. We've met in Albany. This is a concerted effort that's going to continue because we now have success. But we're not resting on our laurels, and it's not enough just to have the strongest gun laws in our nation, which we are proud to have. We have to double down on the solutions that make a difference. Our budget. Many of these areas were underfunded. You want to get the job done, you have to put resources on the table. We put in a historic $227 million in investing in gun violence prevention programs, law enforcement support, exclamation point, supporting law enforcement. We have centers to collect crime and data, investigative work, as well as information development. And that, again, that helps them effectively solve, reduce, and eventually prevent gun crimes. And also, criminals will continue to be clever, always have been. They try to evade our laws, and we have to continue to strengthen them. You think about the day-to-day street crimes, laser focused on this. But then we had to deal with the aftermath of a horrific massacre that occurred in my hometown, in Buffalo, on May 14th. And there, an 18-year-old was able to legally purchase an AR-15 under the then New York state laws, cross over into Pennsylvania, purchase legally in Pennsylvania, a high-capacity magazine, and that's how he slaughtered my neighbors. So it was devastating for that community. We've been back many, many times to help deal with the emotional scars and the trauma of what that has done to a community that didn't deserve that, and we're there for them. But I immediately called on the legislature and says, okay, they had already left for the session. We have to get these weapons of war off the streets. So as a result, working with the legislature, nation-leading package on making sure we do have the toughest gun laws. And I'll just go over a few of them because I want everyone to know what the law of the land here in the state of New York is. A threat of a mass harm crime is the threat of making a mass harm is now a crime. So you threaten this, that is a crime. So again, connecting the dots, stopping it before something tragic happens. That is how we're approaching these investigations. Banning the sale of AR-15s for those under 21. It was insanity that you could be purchasing them. I don't think you should be able to purchase them at all. But we have court cases that say otherwise. But we now say that people under the age of 21, a teenager, becomes radicalized through social media platforms, as has happened in the case in Buffalo. There's evidence of that. They can no longer get their hands on one legally. Banning the large capacity magazines. Banning the sale of body armor. Think about this. The shooter in Buffalo could have been stopped by the on-site security guard, except that this person had body armor in that would be normally issued to people on a battlefield across the world, and that's not how we're doing it in New York anymore. We also talked about, I mentioned social media a number of times. I've called upon and working closely with our Attorney General to identify what's going on in social media. Those questions are now part of our background checks, just like in the old days, you'd talk to someone's neighbor. Now you can talk to their neighbors online and find out whether or not this person has been spouting philosophies that indicate that they have been radicalized, and that's how we protect our citizens as well. We're also requiring permits for semi-automatic rifles. We're having background checks for buying ammunition. We're having an ammunition database and requiring enhanced reporting by all law enforcement agencies, and that's part of ATF's collective data sharing program. Again, it's strange to think that the ATF is doing their work. They have a database, but there are not requirements that localities or states provide the ATF with what they're finding. So again, another void of information sharing that was crippling the ability to make smart decisions based on data and target the people who are the shooters, the trigger pullers, as well as leading them to the major traffickers. So you'll be hearing about that, but also in my budget, we literally tripled our funding for the 10 crime analysis centers across the state, and we're continuing to do that work. Lastly, I'll talk about what we did with our red flag laws. We're very proud that immediately after the Buffalo shooting, I directed, and this was not permissive, this was a directive to the state police, that when they become aware of an individual who could do harm to themselves or others, we have a right to find out if they have access to weapons, and if so, take them, appear before a judge, make your case, but in so doing, you may be preventing the next mass shooting or further shootings on the streets. So we've had a number of protection orders along these lines. We just did an event out in Suffolk County, which is #1 in the state in terms of issuing these. Our orders of protection increased over 74% in this short time, 188 protection orders issued, and that means 188 people may have been thwarted from doing harm to others, and that's how we've kept hundreds and hundreds of guns out of the hands of others. So again, following the Supreme Court decision, which was not welcome in our state, the decision at the end of June, in addition to undoing the rights of all women in this country, they also took away the right of a governor to protect her citizens from people carrying concealed carry weapons. And we got together quickly. We made changes. That law had been in place for over a century. So now we're working through this extraordinary session we have. We now have August 31st. You'll see me doing another event. I'll be talking about exactly what we've been working on almost daily, putting together all the regulations that talk about, what are the sensitive locations where we're going to restrict concealed weapons. We're in conversation with the mayor on this to talk about, our concern about the city of New York and our subways and our places of worship and schools and countless places where common sense says someone should not be able to carry a weapon concealed because you don't know what they're going to do with it. So we're taking it back. within the confines of the new Supreme Court decision, and all that information will be released in time for the September 1 effective date. And as I mentioned, we're going to enhance, have background checks for ammunition, safe storage requirements, so we're doing a lot. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. We're continuing to focus on this. First thing I think about in the morning and last thing at night is how we can continue to keep New Yorkers safer. So we're not going backwards, despite all the obstacles that are thrown our way. We're persevering because the cause is just, protecting citizens and giving that security that every parent deserves, or every person who comes to our cities or our other areas around the state. They deserve to feel safe. And I, as the governor, working with the mayor, working with our federal partners in Washington, are also duly committed to sharing information, sharing resources, sharing talent, and that is how we're going to make a real difference. So we're not just going to talk about doing something, we're actually doing something. More needs to be done, without a doubt. I'm just giving people a snapshot on the progress we're seeing thus far, but we will not rest until we've done everything in our power to end the scourge of gun violence in our streets. So with that, I'd like you to hear from the ATF Director, Stephen Dettelbeck, who, again, brand new on the job, but he comes with a depth of experience, having been a United States attorney in almost neighboring Ohio, Cleveland area, and I'm familiar with his work because at the same time he was U.S. Attorney under President Barack Obama. My husband was U.S. Attorney in the Western District, so they work closely together. So I'm well aware of your friendship with our family, but also the incredible work you're doing at a significant level in our federal government. So, ladies and gentlemen, ATF Director Stephen Dettelbeck.
Thank you so much, Governor Hochul. Thank you, Mayor, for convening this group of committed public servants and for inviting me here today to highlight and participate in the critical work of the task force here. It is truly, as the governor said, a national model, and that's why I've been here now twice to try and understand and highlight the incredible work that's being done here to protect people. I'm Steve Dettelbeck, and I am honored to be the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I am, as the governor said, the first permanent ATF director in 7 years, and I have been on the job for just a little over a month. But in that time, I am no stranger to the incredible work that ATF and law enforcement professionals are doing on this task force. I want to just single out the law enforcement leaders from both the city, the state. Kevin Bruin is here, and then our incredible SAC here, John DeVito. Their collaboration with so many other law enforcement leaders is what is making this possible. And I will say, as a side note, when I started in this business 30 years ago, the kind of thing that I saw today as I walked through the Crime Gun Center, as I talked to people with parole, state parole, sitting next to city police, sitting next to feds, all working together, would just not have happened. And it's really important. It starts with law enforcement leadership, so thank you very much. As a former federal prosecutor and U.S. attorney, I am sadly too familiar with the horrible toll that gun violence wreaks on communities represented in this room and rooms all over our country. And this toll sadly goes beyond the unspeakable terror of mass shootings, which are terrible in our schools, our houses of worship, places where we shop. Every single day in our nation, more than 100 lives are tragically brought to an end by gun violence in individual incidents that don't make national headlines. This is unacceptable. This must end. The governor mentioned this, but one piece of news that I'm glad to report is today is the day that the federal government's new frame and receiver rule, which many have called the ghost gun rule, actually goes into effect. And just yesterday, two courts, one in North Dakota, one in Texas, denied motions to stop that new rule from going into effect. And that plays directly into what I'm going to talk about you see happening with law enforcement here in this room. Because that provides the kind of intelligence and information that law enforcement can use to identify and stop trigger pullers, people who are using firearms to kill other people. The members of this task force know and have figured out how to make a real difference. And I'm here to assure the governor, the mayor, the superintendent, the chief, the commissioner, everybody, that you will have no stronger and more reliable partner than ATF to support and uplift your incredible efforts here. This group knows what works: collaboration, information sharing, leveraging technology, and expertise. And ATF is all in. Through the Crime Gun Intelligence Centers, through our E-Trace gun tracing system, and through, as the governor talked about, NIBIN, which is the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. That's the way that law enforcement can now connect the dots between crime guns, which might be used in more than one incident, which is a direct and important way to really identify those trigger pullers and shooters who are out there. We're committed to providing law enforcement with actionable intelligence and leads that are needed to identify trigger pullers. And these people are terrorizing the communities every single day. We're committed to working shoulder to shoulder with you every day to investigate, arrest, and successfully prosecute these criminals. As the governor said, as a former prosecutor, it's very important that the prosecutors, and I heard today about how the prosecutors are participating in this, how important it is to bring prosecutors into the process as early as possible. As the governor told us, since this group convened, crime gun seizures, gun-related arrests, and prosecutions have increased here in New York, and these are not empty statistics. By applying crime gun intelligence in a collaborative, multi-state effort, this task force, the one that sits on this floor, ensures that we focus our limited resources both on those who cause the most violence and, as the governor pointed out, on the supply networks that fuel that problem. As I said, this is my second trip to New York in my brief tenure, and I have met with Mayor Adams and his staff, and I am grateful that he, like Governor Hochul, welcomes ATF's contributions and is putting the states and cities' resources behind it. NYPD resources, right here at New York HIDA, Crime Gun Intelligence Center, the state police, and the ATF, and so many other agencies working together. It's one of the most impressive things as you walk into the conference room and you see the seal that we were meet of all the different agencies that are working together. That is truly what makes all of this work. And again, much of that is due to the leadership also on the federal side of John DeVito, the SAC here in New York, who's done a great job of trying to explain and be sort of the Pied Piper of crime gun intelligence here to explain what we can bring to try and help state and local law enforcement officers every day. It's not limited to New York, as the governor said. Crime gun intelligence centers, New Jersey, Boston, Philadelphia, Columbus are there, out there. But I will say, since my first visit here, I've met with law enforcement and community leaders all around the country: Florida, Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, and just yesterday, Chicago. Even chiefs who are dealing with the problem just across the border in Quebec. And all of those people are trying to do things that are being done here in New York. You are truly national and international leaders in trying to be smart and aggressive on this problem. And I talk about what's going on here and want to learn more about the details of what goes on here so that I can highlight the important work and people can try to adapt that work and copy it. I always say that some of the best ideas I ever had as an attorney I stole from other people. That's what we do in law enforcement when we're at our best. We take what works somewhere else and adapt it to where we are. And this model, what you have here in New York, you shouldn't take for granted. It took a lot of hard work, not by me, I'm the new guy, by the people standing here and the people out there in law enforcement community to make this happen. So I pledge my support and ATF support for this effort. I thank you all for your dedication and service. And let me just say one last time, if I hadn't said enough, the men and women of ATF are committed to being the best possible partner in helping you in your critical mission that you're working on here, protecting the people of New York.
Thank you, Director, and thank you for calling out what we've achieved here in the state of New York, working with our local government partners. And again, we're not done, but I think taking over 6,000 guns off the streets over the last year through a coordinated effort is something to, that the criminals are not happy about. And so we know they're going to try and, do an end run around us, but we now have the coordination. Again, the silos that once existed between even within federal entities and local and state, uh, they're gone. They're gone. I have no impatience for that. We break it down everywhere we find it and just say collaboration is how we're going to get ahead of these criminals. And so talk about that cooperation and collaboration. It happens right at the top here in the city of New York. And I'm really proud of the relationship that we've developed and deepened getting through so many challenges together. But this is the one that I know the mayor and I truly believe that our resources together, data sharing together, and it's not about getting credit, it's about getting the job done, that we're really making a difference. So I want to thank my partner right here in the city of New York, our great mayor, Eric Adams.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you so much. Hard to believe that it has only been a year when I heard you say that as governor, signing as governor. The team was for many years, almost 7 years, we were missing a quarterback. We was missing someone that was going to orchestrate the entire offensive team to go after these gun distributors, manufacturers, users, traffickers. And having Director Dettelbach with us, we're seeing that coordination. And I don't think that we should dismiss the fact that we are in alignment on the city, state, and federal level, because that is what's going to be needed to go after an extremely aggressive overproliferation of guns in our country. And what we're doing here in New York with that coordination, I think the director is right. It's something that we could duplicate across the entire country. Gun manufacturers, gun distributors, gun users are not stopping at our borders. They do not stop based on the boundaries of the state borders. They are bringing harm across our entire country. And this is a national crisis that we are facing. And crisis calls for coordination. And that is what we're doing. And I'm proud to be a part of this. I sat here earlier in the administration, and I witnessed what the New York City Police Department is doing with all of its partners, everyone from probation to district attorney's office, state police, everyone that comes in contact with illegal gun users or distributors are at the table sitting down and saying how we could do it together to solve this problem. Now the missing piece has been the leader of the ATF, and we have that leader. And I think that really New Yorkers and Americans are going to be safer because of that. So I thank the governor. I thank the entire team here. This is clearly a dream team. And you're right, Director. In my days in policing, there were so many walls between city, state, and federal lawmakers. And those walls have been dismantled with the leadership of the governor and the leadership of the new director. The numbers are impressive when you think about it. New York City Police Department has seized approximately over 4,700 guns off the street of New York this year. They made over 3,000 gun arrests. And both murder and shootings, as the governor indicated, are down by 11%. But it appears as though the more we remove a gun off the street, not only are we finding difficulties and stopping those flows of guns to come on the street, but even some of the trigger pullers and shooters have become too comfortable with discharging a weapon and carrying a weapon. And that is why the governor and I are joined at the hip and making sure that we have strong laws to deal with these real crises that we are facing. Gun problems in New York City is a national problem. It's a national problem. If it's in Chicago, Atlanta, Detroit, St. Louis, no matter where you go, in large cities in America, we're dealing with the problems of guns. And if we're honest about it, the victims are predominantly black, brown, and poor. And that lack of urgency is something that we have to be honest about. And I commend this president. This president has made it clear that he was not going to sit on the sidelines and allow this national problem to continue. And that is where the energy is coming from the ATF and all the other men and women of the law enforcement community as we go after and tackle gun violence. I'm happy to be part of this team. I'm happy to have an aggressive, knowledgeable, seasoned quarterback of this fight that we're having with the ATF, and I am happy to have a governor that joins me in understanding the urgency that we must dam every river that feeds the sea of gun violence in our city, in our state, and in our country. And together we're going to dam those rivers and make sure that our city is in a safe city. Public safety and justice, they are the prerequisite to prosperity. You cannot live in a city or country without them. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Director.
All right, thank you very much. At this point, we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you, Mayor. I know you have another event to get to, and we'll take on-topic questions and off-topic off to the side. Any on-topic questions for the Director or myself? Yes. 1,500 guns. We said there's 6,000 guns over the last year. The 140% increase in seizures, I believe, is since January, correct, Superintendent? And that would represent those numbers there for the state police. So just, I'm tracking two DETSA numbers. One is for the last year, but also I'm really interested in seeing the difference that this task force is making. And they've launched over 481 investigations that have led to arrests in all the states that I'm talking about, and that is because of the shared information, which is extraordinary. That did not happen before. That is a game changer. That has just happened since this coordination started under my direction and the cooperation of so many people just last January. We certainly are in conversations. You know, they don't want illegal guns either, you know, though some are manufactured there. So we can certainly talk about expanding this, again, a 7-month-old operation, and even having as far as Ohio and Pennsylvania that have different gun laws. They still want to make sure we get illegal guns off the street, and again, all the way up to Quebec. So I'm willing to do that, and I think that's what the Director is looking to do, is point to us as an example and encourage, whether it's more regional approaches where the southern states work on this as well, but you're absolutely right that that is the origin. We track where the guns are coming from all the time, and it is primarily those southern states. Any comments on this, Director?
Just briefly, so the governor's correct, and one of the things that the Department of Justice is doing is Attorney General Garland, as part of the comprehensive gun violence strategy, formed 5 gun trafficking strike forces in the United States in places where the data showed it was most important. And New York is one of them. And the idea behind those strike forces is for gun trafficking, people who are illegally running guns up to places like here, to be able to work with law enforcement in those other states to try and stop those patterns of travel. So that there is, I was actually, again, one of my first days of work, I went to a briefing that the Attorney General called for the ATF SACs who are leading those task forces along with U.S. attorneys. And New York was there and then briefed on a case that they had been doing to address exactly that kind of concern.
We can put more teeth behind it. There had been a lot of talk about red flag laws in schools, for example. I helped lead that in the past to let people know, especially after the Parkland shooting, where one of the victims was the son of Long Island residents. And they became very mobilized in wanting changes so we can get that alert out in schools. But it's beyond just schools. It's beyond just making sure that teachers and administrators see the signs in a student who might do harm to themselves or to, in the worst scenario, commit a mass shooting. We also, this happens in a grocery store. This happens in a workplace. It can happen anywhere. So we saw the vulnerabilities, and I said, well, let's tighten this up. And what I did by executive order, even before we convened the legislature, was said, I'm directing the state police, where I do have direct authority, to say, this is not an option. You see this evidence, you are required to go seek this extreme risk order of protection, and that is why the numbers are off the charts compared to what we had done before, because it was a tool that's been there, never focused on, and I'm also working on training. In fact, as part of my daily briefings on what we're doing on on crime fighting, we're putting together a training module to train law enforcement all across the state. I mean, it's not just our state police. It is everybody down to the smallest police department in the state of New York. I want them to be aware of this. But I also want to take it now also to workplaces so people can identify what they see, the signs that are out there. And not that someone's monitoring their neighbor in a workplace's social media sites, but people talk about things all the time. And those clues are what are going to get us to a place where we can be preventing these crimes. So they needed to be enhanced. We solved the vulnerabilities. We worked on it, and now that's the change. That's the change. Some of the changes we made. Yes.
Governor, on the data on the shootings dropping statewide, while that's the case, statistics from the NYPD show that shootings in the city last month were actually up 13% as compared to July 2021. Murders were up 34% in the same time frame. This would suggest that there's still some